My sincerest apologies for the delay in releasing this episode. My wife, Emily, and I recently celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary, and I wanted to make it special by taking her to see Demon Slayer, Infinity Train in theaters. There's something oddly romantic about sharing an action-packed anime on the big screen, don't you think? Anyway, after a much-needed break, I've poured my heart and vocal cords into curating this collection of new and allegedly true scary stories for you today. From haunted trees to unsettling specters and eerie time warps, this episode promises to send chills down your spine. If you enjoy it, do me a favor, leave a like, follow and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to Darkness Prevails on YouTube. And don't forget to send your own spine-tingling tales of the unknown to Darkstories, or I'd love to feature your story in the next episode. Thank you, and now, let's dive in. Hellhound in my hometown. When I was around 16, my family lived in a quaint, sleepy town in Michigan with a population of barely 1,000 people. Growing up, we didn't have much money, so luxuries like internet or cable were out of the question. Every night, I'd make my way to the local library after it had closed, sitting on the cold stone steps under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, just to mooch off their free Wi-Fi. It was my little ritual, catching up on YouTube, downloading music, and staying connected with my friends and favorite TV shows. Sometimes, if I was feeling adventurous, I'd even stream a movie. There was something oddly comforting about sitting there in the silence, surrounded by the history of my town. It's an old place, one of the original stops on America's first railway system. The buildings are a mix of apartments perched above small businesses and houses that have stood for over a century, their weathered facades whispering tales of the past. The town is steeped in supernatural lore, legends like Dr. Blood and the infamous Blood Cemetery of the graveyard cults. I'd heard the stories, of course, but I'd never ventured to Blood Cemetery to mock Mr. Blood or test the rumors. This story, however, is entirely separate from those legends, unless you count the mysterious disappearing fog that sometimes rolled in without warning. It was a chilly autumn evening, the kind where the air feels heavy, and the rustling of leaves sounds almost like whispers. I was sitting on the library steps, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed something strange. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows of the alley across the street. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, my fingers tightening around my phone. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the source of the sound. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes piercing through the gloom like embers in the night. My breath hitched as the creature stepped into the faint light of the street lamp. It was massive, with matted black fur and a muscular frame that seemed to radiate menace. Its jaws were slightly parted, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth, and its breath came in short, ragged bursts, visible in the cold air. I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Was it a dog? A wolf? But no, this was something else entirely. It was a hellhound straight out of the nightmares I'd only ever heard about in stories. The creature locked eyes with me, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a deafening snarl, it lunged forward. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I bolted down the street. The sound of its heavy paws hitting the pavement echoed behind me, growing louder with each passing second. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my legs burning with the effort, until I finally reached the safety of my front porch. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling, and slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. Was it real, or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? All I know is that I never went back to the library after dark again. The humid midsummer air clung to my skin as I sat on the weathered stone steps outside the public library, the orange glow of streetlights painting the empty pavement. My headphones pulsed with familiar melodies, creating a fragile bubble of normalcy during my nightly ritual of stolen internet access. The usual hour passed peacefully until an unnatural chill crept up my spine, raising goosebumps across my arms despite the season's warmth. Suddenly, a guttural bark shattered the night. Not from any ordinary dog, but something primal that vibrated through the pavement and rattled my bones. Every neighborhood canine erupted in frenzied response, their chorus swelling into chaos before cutting off abruptly, as if severed by an unseen hand. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the whisper of wind through distant trees. My pulse hammered in my throat as I scanned the dimly lit street, searching for the source of that otherworldly sound. Then the scent hit me, acrid sulfur burning my nostrils, thick enough to taste. A primal dread coiled in my gut, screaming at me to move. I barely had time to throw myself into the nearest apartment stairwell before I heard it, the slow, wet drag of breath just beyond the door. The wood groaned as something massive leaned against it, claws scraping against the frame in deliberate strokes. "It's memorizing you," my mind supplied hysterically. I pressed my entire weight against the door, my shirt damp with cold sweat as the pressure intensified, threatening to splinter the hinges. Then, as suddenly as it came, the presence withdrew. The neighborhood dogs remained silent. I counted to 300 before daring to emerge, my legs trembling as I forced myself to walk, not run, down the deserted sidewalk. But with each step, the barks resumed in a sinister wave, each yelp synchronizing with my movement like a macabre breadcrumb trail. The sulfur stench returned, closer now, carried on a frigid draft that shouldn't exist in July. My composure shattered. I sprinted the final blocks home, the sensation of hot breath on my neck spurring me forward, until my front door's deadbolt clicked into place. Even now, I don't know why it followed me. Why me? But sometimes, when the neighborhood dogs fall silent at night, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for the scrape of claws against my welcome mat. The eerie sensation it emitted was enough to convince me that I wanted nothing to do with this hellhound. From that moment on, I stopped venturing out late at night, and a few months later, we finally got internet installed at home. This meant I never had to leave the safety of my house after dark again. Not that I ever planned to. The thought of a second encounter with one of hell's guardians was enough to keep me firmly indoors. It was as if the universe had conspired to keep me safe, though I couldn't shake the lingering unease that clung to me like a shadow. My name is Kudzi, and I'm from Zimbabwe. My sister Rachel and I have been avid fans of the show since its early days. Inspired by the stories shared, I decided to recount an experience of my own that occurred about 6 months ago. I was born and raised in a devout Christian family in Goromanzi, a small town nestled about 40 kilometers northeast of Harare, Zimbabwe. During the weekdays, I work and stay in the city, but every Friday, I make the journey back home to spend the weekend with my parents. Our house is situated in a farming area, which means our nearest neighbor is roughly 1.5 to 2 kilometers away. The isolation lends a certain tranquility to the place, though it also amplifies the silence, especially at night. On this particular Friday, I returned home as usual. To paint a clearer picture, let me describe the layout of our house. The front door opens directly into the living room. To the immediate left of the entrance is the door to my parents' bedroom. Further along the same wall, there's another door leading to the room I share with my sister Rachel. Continuing down the hallway, you'll find a third door on the left, which leads to the kitchen. Directly opposite the kitchen is my brother's room. It's a simple, functional layout, one that I've known all my life. That night I went to bed with Rachel as usual. Around 2:00 a.m., I was jolted awake by a heavy, sinking sensation in my chest, a feeling of being pulled downward. Over the years, I've come to recognize this as a precursor to sleep paralysis, a state where the mind is awake but the body remains immobilized. Just as I braced myself for the familiar dread, I slipped into a strange, vivid dream. In the dream, I saw one of our cousins, let's call him Michael, walk through the front door and into the living room as if in real time. He moved with an unsettling purpose, his footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness of the house. His expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed ahead as though he was on a mission. I watched, paralyzed, as he approached my parents' bedroom door, his hand reaching for the knob. A chill ran down my spine and I wanted to scream, to warn someone, but no sound escaped my lips. The air felt heavy, suffused with an inexplicable tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The dream felt so real, so tangible, that when I finally woke up, I lay there for several minutes, my heart pounding, trying to distinguish between the remnants of the dream and the reality of the quiet, moonlit room around me. Rachel slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been in our house that night, even if only in the realm of dreams. The bedroom was cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the night outside. The air felt dense, almost suffocating, as if the room itself was holding its breath. It was in this stillness that I saw her, Angela, my cousin, who had passed away just 2 weeks prior after a long battle with illness. Her presence was unsettling, her appearance distorted in a way that sent a chill down my spine. Her eyes were unnaturally large, her cheeks hollow, and her gaze fixed, unblinking. The darkness in her eyes was absolute, devoid of pupils or any semblance of humanity. She didn't speak, but her movements were deliberate, as if she was trying to guide me toward my parents' room. A sinking feeling settled in my chest, mingling with a growing sense of dread. My heart pounded as I suddenly shouted, "Buddha Pan," a phrase in Shona, our native language, meaning "get out." The words tore from my throat, sharp and desperate, even as I remained asleep. Instantly, the dream dissolved, but I didn't wake up immediately. Instead, I floated in a liminal space, half aware of my surroundings. My mother, startled by my shout, hurried to our room. The creak of the door hinges broke the silence as she peeked inside, finding me curled up, seemingly peaceful, like a child lost in slumber. The contrast between my outward calm and the chaos of my dream was jarring. The next morning, as I went about my chores, the memory of the night before resurfaced. A mix of guilt, embarrassment, and a lingering unease washed over me. "Mom," I began hesitantly, my voice soft. "I'm sorry for making noise last night. I didn't mean to disturb you." She smiled gently, brushing off my apology with a wave of her hand. "It's all right, sweetheart. These things happen." But this wasn't the first time. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to waking up and apologizing for the strange noises I made in my sleep. It was as if my subconscious was a battleground, and my dreams were the echoes of unseen struggles. Just as I finished speaking, my father chimed in, his tone thoughtful. "I had a strange dream last night too," he said, his brow furrowing. "It was around the same time before your mother went to check on you. In my dream, I saw a witch doctor entering through the front door. I started praying, and after your shout, everything just stopped." In most African Christian households, the mention of a witch doctor carried a weight of fear and suspicion, a symbol of malevolence. The coincidence of our dreams, both ending abruptly at the same moment, left us all wondering who, or what, had tried to visit us that night. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as we exchanged uneasy glances. The memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown. Dreams, I realized, were more than just fragments of imagination. They were windows into something deeper, something we couldn't fully understand. And as I stood there, surrounded by the familiar warmth of my family, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something far beyond our comprehension. You can call me Alex. This is a story my father used to tell me and my siblings when we were younger. It happened to him in his early 20s back in the summer of 1978, a time when life felt simpler, yet full of mysteries waiting to unfold. There were 4 of them that day: my dad, his younger brothers Michael and Eric, and their close friend Paul. They had borrowed a small aluminum fishing boat from a neighbor and set off for Caribou Lake near Ludson, Minnesota. Even now, Caribou Lake remains a hidden gem, tucked deep within the Superior National Forest. No cabins, no beaches, just an endless expanse of thick trees and a narrow, winding trail that led down to the water's edge. The lake was quiet, almost secretive, as if it guarded its stories closely. The weather that evening was unusually foggy. My dad always described it as a heavy, suffocating fog, so dense that the far shore was completely obscured. The mist seemed to swallow the forest whole, muffling every sound. No birds called out. No breeze rustled the leaves. It felt, as he put it, like the world had been paused, and they were intruding on something that should have been left undisturbed. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet earth, but there was an eerie stillness that made the atmosphere feel heavier than it should have been. Michael, the middle brother, was the serious one. Though a few years younger than my dad, he always carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. He was a natural worrier, the type who double-checked knots and meticulously organized their fishing tackle. Michael knew fish, and when they weren't biting, he was certain there was a reason. That evening, he sat quietly in the boat, his brow furrowed as he scanned the water, his instincts on high alert. Eric, the youngest at just 17, was the opposite. He was a ball of energy, always the first to speak, the first to laugh, but also the first to feel fear. Silence unnerved him, and the fog that evening seemed to amplify his unease. He fidgeted with his fishing rod, glancing over his shoulder every so often as if expecting something to emerge from the mist. "This fog is creepy," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like we're not supposed to be here." Paul, though not family, was as close as a brother. He was bold and confident, the type who always sought to prove himself but never crossed the line into recklessness. When it came to the outdoors, he deferred to my dad and Michael, though there was a restless edge to him that made him eager to push forward, even when the others hesitated. That evening, he leaned against the side of the boat, his eyes scanning the fog with a mix of curiosity and caution. "It's just fog," he said, trying to sound reassuring, though his tone lacked its usual conviction. "It'll lift soon." Once they reached deeper water, my dad cut the motor, letting the boat drift silently. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the aluminum hull as they baited their hooks. The fog seemed to close in around them, wrapping the boat in a cocoon of stillness. My dad later admitted that even he, usually the calmest of the group, felt a strange tension in the air, a sense that they were not alone. Their hooks hung lifelessly in the dark water of Caribou Lake, a place usually teeming with walleye or the occasional northern pike. But that night, the lake seemed to have turned against them. The lines dangled without so much as a nibble, the stillness of the water unnerving. They tried the shallows first, casting near the reed beds where the fish often lurked, then ventured into deeper waters, drifting between the shadows of the trees and the center of the lake. Yet each time they pulled up their lines, they were either stripped clean or untouched entirely. Not even the faintest tug. It was as if the lake had been emptied of all life. After nearly an hour of fruitless effort, Michael broke the silence, his voice low but edged with unease. "Something's not right," he muttered, his eyes scanning the glassy surface. "The water's too still, too quiet." His words hung heavy in the air, amplified by the fact that Michael wasn't the type to spook easily. Eric, sitting across from him, tried to brush it off with a whisper. "Maybe the fish have gone deep," he suggested, though the way his fingers gripped the side of the boat betrayed his own nerves. Paul, seated at the stern, said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the fog that clung to the lake like a shroud, the oar resting limply in his lap. His shoulders were tense, as if he were bracing for something to emerge from the mist. Then the first ripple appeared. My father later recounted how it seemed to materialize out of nowhere, spreading in slow, deliberate circles across the surface. The air was so still that the faint sound of the water moving was the only thing breaking the silence. All three men froze, their eyes locked on the widening circle, their breaths shallow. Another ripple followed, farther off this time, but larger, too broad to have come from any fish they knew. A third ripple came even closer, its origin impossible to pinpoint. And then, without warning, something vast slid beneath the boat. It wasn't like a muskie or even a sturgeon. It was far too large. The shadow blotted out the faint glow of the water beneath, wide and long, moving with a steady, deliberate power that made their little aluminum boat feel like a toy adrift on an ocean. They sat in stunned silence as the shape disappeared into the grayness of the fog. Moments later, the surface broke. My father never gave an exact description of what emerged. He always said the details were impossible to hold onto. The fog, the distance, the sheer shock of it all blurred his memory. But what he did remember was the sheer size of it and the way it moved. A long, serpentine head lifted from the water, its form indistinct but unmistakably massive. The air seemed to grow colder, and the lake, once so familiar, now felt like a place they had never truly known. The mist hung heavy over the lake, a thick veil that muted the world around them. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of algae and wet earth. Beneath the surface, the water was dark and slick, rippling gently as if alive. Eric's breath hitched as he spotted them first, eyes pale and unblinking, catching the faint light that filtered through the fog. They weren't glowing or monstrous, but their reflective gaze was unnerving, fixed intently on the boat. Then the body rolled past. It was massive, its ridged and muscular form a dark green-black against the haze. It moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so vast, too long to belong to any creature that could be contained within a single lake. The boys sat frozen, barely daring to breathe, their hearts pounding in unison. The creature circled them once, its presence sending a chill through the air. The boat rocked violently, the aluminum hull groaning under the strain. Eric let out a sharp gasp, his hands clutching the edge of the boat. Michael's voice was barely audible as he whispered, "Stay still. Don't move." Paul, gripping his oar so tightly his knuckles turned white, nodded silently, his eyes wide with fear. The creature passed beneath them again, its shadow blotting out the murky depths below. When it surfaced on the other side, the water swelled around it, the fog seeming to close in as if shielding it from view. It began trailing them, its movements deliberate and unhurried. Each time they dipped their oars to move, it followed, sometimes just a few yards off, other times sliding beneath the boat with its long, ominous shadow. It would break the surface briefly, just the arch of its back or a coil sliding through the mist, before sinking silently again. My father later described it as being followed by a storm cloud, something inevitable and ancient that had noticed them and wasn't ready to let them go. The worst was the nudging. The first hit came from beneath, a hard jolt that lifted one side of the boat enough to send water sloshing over the edge. The boys scrambled, gripping the sides, their hearts racing. A second shove came moments later, harder this time, sliding the boat a few feet sideways. It wasn't trying to sink them, not yet. It was testing, curious, probing to see what they were. The boys rowed harder then, their silence thick with tension. Soon, the creature surfaced again, closer than before. Its head turned toward them, those pale eyes catching the gray light of the fog. And then came the sound. My father always paused here when he told the story, his voice quiet, as if recalling it still unnerved him. It wasn't a roar or a hiss or a growl. It was something else entirely, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the air and water alike, a sound that felt ancient and unknowable. The vibration was unlike anything they had ever felt, low, deep, and pervasive, resonating through the water itself. It traveled up through the wooden seats of the boat, settling into their bones, a steady hum that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the lake. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Even Eric, who could always be counted on to fill the silence with his endless chatter, sat motionless, his mouth clamped shut. His usual bravado had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed fear that mirrored the others. The vibration grew stronger, almost oppressive, as if the lake itself were alive and humming with some unseen force. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint ringing in their ears. The water, once rippling with unseen movement, went unnaturally still. The creature, whatever it had been, was gone, but none of them dared to believe it. They sat frozen, their eyes scanning the surface, waiting for another ripple, another shadow, any sign that it might return. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but the lake remained eerily calm. Finally, Michael broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start rowing," he urged, his tone urgent but controlled. They obeyed, their movements slow and hesitant at first, as if afraid to disturb the water. But as the reality of their situation sank in, their strokes grew faster, more desperate. The fog clung to the lake like a suffocating blanket, obscuring any sense of direction. They rowed blindly, guided only by the primal need to escape. Several times they thought they heard it, a low, guttural sound trailing behind them. But when they turned, there was nothing but the endless gray mist. After what felt like an eternity, the boat scraped against something solid. They had reached the shore. Relief washed over them as they dragged the boat halfway onto the wet, pebbly ground and stumbled out, their legs shaky and unsteady. They collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily, their hearts still racing. The lake behind them was calm now, as silent and still as it had been when they first set out. But none of them trusted it, not after what they had felt, what they had heard. They never saw the creature again. None of them ever returned to Caribou Lake. Years later, Michael would tell the story to his children, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and unease. He always said the reason they hadn't caught a single fish that night, the reason the lake had been so unnaturally quiet, was because that thing had driven everything else away. Fish, birds, even the insects. It had claimed the lake as its own. Whether you believe the story or not is up to you. I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But if you ever find yourself out on the water, especially on a quiet lake shrouded in thick fog, stay alert. Because something might be lurking just beneath the surface, and you'll never see it coming. It followed us from house to house, a shadow we could never quite escape. From XOX Wicked Soul XOX. I've experienced paranormal things, but nothing quite like that night on Caribou Lake. Since I was around 9 years old, my life has been intertwined with experiences that are difficult to explain. For context, my sister, Emma, is 3 years older than I am. I'll do my best to recount some of the strange occurrences we've shared, though I apologize if this comes across as disjointed or unclear. I've never written any of this down before, and writing is exactly my strong suit, so please bear with me. When I was about 9, my family moved to a house just one property away from my grandmother's home, where we had lived since I was a baby. Our immediate family consisted of myself, Emma, and our parents. My mother, Sarah, is part Native American and has always been deeply attuned to emotions. She's intuitive, empathetic, and often seems to know things she couldn't possibly have any way of knowing. For instance, she knew Emma was pregnant before Emma herself did. Sarah was also highly sensitive to the paranormal as a child. My father, Michael, on the other hand, was the complete opposite, skeptical and dismissive of anything supernatural. I believe Emma and I inherited our mother's sensitivity. The house we moved into had belonged to our friends, Heather and Laura, who had relocated to a larger home further down the road. Just before they moved, Emma and I spent time with them, helping them pack. Their aunt, whom we'll call B, was there as well. I don't recall her real name, as we only met her twice. B was a gypsy and a Wiccan in every sense of the word. Her clothing, her demeanor, her aura. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. One afternoon, while we were all gathered in the house, the conversation turned to the paranormal and Ouija boards. B casually mentioned that she owned one and suggested we try it. Looking back, it was a foolish idea, but at the time, it seemed harmless. We played with the board, but nothing unusual happened that day. After Heather and Laura moved out, Emma and I decided to make our own Ouija board. We wanted to try contacting our grandmother, Jewel, Sarah's mother, who had passed away about 5 years earlier. Our room had bunk beds, and we often stayed up late whispering about the supernatural, our imaginations running wild. The air in the house always felt heavy, as if it held secrets we couldn't quite grasp. The creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of the curtains, and the distant hum of the wind outside seemed to amplify our unease. Emma, ever the bold one, took the lead. Her voice was steady, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I, on the other hand, felt a mix of curiosity and dread, my heart pounding as we placed our fingers on the makeshift planchette. The room grew colder, and the silence became suffocating. I remember thinking, what if this actually works? The question lingered in my mind, unspoken but palpable. Ashley was perched on the top bunk while I settled on the lower one. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. We were seated on Ashley's bed, hunched over our makeshift Ouija board, fingers lightly resting on the planchette. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation as we whispered questions into the silence, hopping for some kind of response. But again, nothing happened. The stillness was almost mocking. We ended the session the way B had taught us, carefully closing the connection, and waited a few moments before deciding to try again, this time in the dining room. The dining room felt colder, the wooden table smooth beneath our hands. This time, there was a slight movement of the planchette, but neither of us believed it was real. Ashley glanced at me, her eyebrows raised skeptically, and I mirrored her expression. Each of us silently suspected the other was pulling a prank. Later that night, we were back in our bedroom, the soft hum of music filling the space. I was lying on the lower bunk, scrolling through my phone when Ashley suddenly gasped. She claimed she had been shoved off the top bunk, landing hard on the floor. Her voice trembled as she described the force, her wide eyes reflecting genuine fear. I tried to lighten the mood, suggesting it might have been our grandmother playing a trick on her. But Ashley shook her head vehemently, her voice breaking as she insisted. No, it wasn't her. Whatever it wasn't Grandma. She was convinced we had invited something sinister into our home. Her fear was palpable as she asked if we could switch beds for a while, too scared to return to the top bunk. Our bedroom had two windows, one on the far right wall near the end of the bed and another partially obscured by the bunk bed. From the lower bunk, you could only see the very bottom of the window, but the top bunk offered a clearer view. We didn't have blinds, just a thin sheet that we'd pull open to let in a breeze on warm nights. As I lay on the top bunk, Ashley and I talked quietly about her experience. My gaze drifted to the window, and that's when I saw it, a small, shadowy figure near the mailbox at the end of the road. The streetlight cast a pool of light around the area, but this dark mass stood out starkly against it. It was no taller than my knee, and I was about 5 feet tall at the time. The shadow seemed to be peeking around the mailbox, and I could just make out a hand clutching something. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, unsure if I should mention it to Ashley. The night suddenly felt much darker, much colder. The shadowy figure took shape, claws curled like rusted hooks, a grotesquely small head perched atop elongated limbs. My breath hitched as I described it to Ashley, my voice barely above a whisper while an icy dread coiled in my gut. Rolling onto my side, I leaned over the edge of the top bunk, meeting Ashley's wide-eyed gaze from below. Her fingers gripped the blanket like a lifeline. "Do you see it too?" she mouthed, but I shook my head before turning back. The mailbox where the shadow had lurked moments ago stood empty now. Relief flickered until movement snagged my attention. The ancient oak outside our window groaned as the silhouette peeled away from its trunk. Moonlight carved its details into stark clarity, obsidian black, denser than the night around it, with crimson eyes that glowed like dying embers. Its grin split unnaturally wide, revealing needle-thin teeth. A chuckle, dry as dead leaves, seemed to vibrate through the glass. Ashley's whimper snapped me back. "Emma, please," she begged, yanking at her sheets. "Stop looking." Her panic was contagious. I wrenched the curtain shut, but the image seared behind my eyelids. We never touched the Ouija board again. Ashley, no, Sarah now, refused even to glance at it, and without her the game lost its thrill. The house stayed quiet after that, though the memory clung like cobwebs. Summer breaks meant refuge at Grandma's, where I'd nestle into her living room love seat, lulled by the hum of her mammoth rear projection TV. That night, pre-dawn stillness pressed heavy as a blanket. Faint light bled from the kitchen down the hall, painting the furniture in skeletal outlines. At my feet, Bubba the boxer tensed, a low growl rumbling through his ribs. I froze. His hackles rose as he glared at the TV's blank screen. Then a flicker. The static hissed to life, pixels coalescing into a face, its features stretching toward me through the glass. Bubba's snarls sharpened. The screen pulsed once, twice, before the room plunged into silence. A dark, shadowy figure loomed over my grandmother, its silhouette leaning ominously with a chilling grin that sent shivers down my spine. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow from the hallway casting eerie shadows on the walls. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as I tried to process the sight before me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I desperately wished for my dog, Bubba, to come closer, to offer some semblance of comfort in the suffocating silence. In my panic, I gently shook my grandmother awake. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. "Why are you so worked up?" she asked, her voice groggy but gentle. I stammered, trying to explain the figure I had seen, my words tumbling out in a rushed whisper. She glanced toward the shadow, now slightly turned as if it were peering directly at me through the TV screen, and calmly replied, "Oh, it's probably just my mother watching over me." Her parents, I remembered, were buried in the garden outside. But I wasn't convinced. "I don't think it's her," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure's presence felt wrong, its gaze piercing and malevolent. I lay there, my eyes glued to the hallway reflected on the TV screen, my body tense and my mind racing. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity, until the first rays of sunlight finally crept through the windows. Only then did I feel the tension in my body ease, the oppressive weight of fear lifting with the dawn. In the years that followed, strange occurrences became a regular part of life in that house. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms, and fingerprints appeared in places no one could have reached. Eventually, my family moved out due to issues with the landlord, and we settled into a small trailer park. By then, my sister had moved out, leaving just me and my parents in the cramped two-bedroom trailer. The layout of the trailer played a crucial role in what happened next. As you entered through the front door, to the right was a couch nestled in the cove of the windows. Across from it, my father's hospital bed stood against the wall, a chair beside it. Built-in cabinets with glass doors separated the living room from the dining area, creating an archway that led to the kitchen on the left and the dining room on the right. In the center of the kitchen and dining area was a door that opened into a narrow hallway. The trailer felt even smaller at night, the walls closing in as shadows danced in the corners. My father, unable to sleep in a normal bed due to his health issues, rested in the living room, his soft snores filling the quiet space. I often found myself glancing over my shoulder, the memories of that shadowy figure never far from my mind. The trailer park was supposed to be a fresh start, but the past seemed determined to follow us. The hallway led to the bedrooms and bathroom, its narrow walls lined with soft, warm light filtering through the curtains. About midway down the hall on the left side was my bedroom, a cozy space filled with personal touches, photos, books, and a small desk cluttered with school supplies. Just a few feet away stood the bathroom, its compact layout designed to maximize every inch of space. Upon entering, the first thing you'd notice was the double sink and large mirror to the right, reflecting the soft glow of the overhead light. Behind the door, a stackable washer and dryer hummed quietly, their presence a practical necessity in the small home. Next to them was the toilet, and against the back wall sat the bathtub, its porcelain surface gleaming under the fluorescent light. At the very end of the trailer was my mom's room, the largest of the two. It was a space of efficiency, with built-ins covering nearly every wall. As you stepped inside, your eyes would immediately be drawn to the far side of the room, where built-in closets with drawers underneath spanned the entire back wall. Between the closets was a vanity, its surface neatly arranged with perfumes and cosmetics. The bed, positioned in the center of the room, was flanked by another wall of built-in closets, their doors blending seamlessly into the design. During this period of my life, I was dadding Brandon, a kind and attentive young man who often spent evenings at our home. His presence brought a sense of comfort, and on occasion, he would stay the night. Our small community was tight-knit, with friends and family living nearby in the same park. My best friend, Holly, who was like a sister to me, her brother Eric, my sister Ashley, and her boyfriend Jesse were frequent visitors. Together, we shared countless memories in that house, though some experiences were far from ordinary. One night after a long day at school, I fell asleep in my room with the TV softly playing in the background. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the screen casting shadows on the walls. I slept deeply for most of the night, but suddenly I awoke to an eerie stillness. My body felt heavy, paralyzed, as if an invisible force was pressing down on me. The TV, which had been murmuring softly, was now silent. Panic surged through me as I tried to move or call out to my parents, but my voice was trapped, my limbs unresponsive. My eyes, the only part of me I could control, darted toward the closet. There I saw a faint green glow, its unnatural hue sending a chill down my spine. Desperate to escape the sight, I shifted my gaze back to the ceiling, only to be met with the horrifying image of a floating head. My heart raced, my mind screamed, but I remained frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear as tears streamed down my face. My mind screamed at me to move, to break free from the invisible force holding me in place. Suddenly, as if a spell had been lifted, everything stopped and I regained control of my limbs. Without a second thought, I leapt out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the room with a warm, reassuring glow. I bolted down the dimly lit hallway, the soft hum of the house's central heating, barely audible over the sound of my rapid breathing. I burst into the kitchen where my dad, James, was sitting at the table, sipping a cup of coffee. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to my frantic state. "Dad," I gasped, my voice trembling, "something happened in my room." I couldn't move, and then I struggled to find the words, but he nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "It's okay, Emma," he said gently, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now." For the rest of the night, I stayed with him, the rhythmic clinking of utensils and the comforting aroma of freshly baked cookies filling the kitchen. As I began to relax, I glanced at the clock too, 00. The night stretched on, but I felt a sense of security in my dad's presence. From that day forward, I never closed my bedroom door completely, always leaving it slightly ajar, and I kept the light on, a small but significant act of defiance against the darkness. The Shadow Man wasn't just a figment of my imagination. My mother, Sarah, my best friend Holly, and I had all encountered him. He would appear in the bathroom, walking across the room while one of us was in the shower. The strange part was, the bathroom was so small that it was impossible for anyone to move across it the way he did. It was as if he defied the laws of space. One evening, as I sat in the living room with my family and friends, Brandon, Holly, Eric, Jesse, Ashley, and my mom, the atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and music. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but as I walked down the hallway, I heard faint noises coming from my mother's room. After finishing in the bathroom, I cautiously peeked into her room. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. The drawers and closets were wide open, their contents strewn across the floor. A heavy sense of being watched settled over me, making the air feel thick and oppressive. The strangest part was that the closets and drawers on the far end of the room, which were rarely used due to their stiffness, were also open. I hurried back to the living room, my heart racing. "Did anyone go into Mom's room just now?" I asked, my voice shaky. Everyone looked at me, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. "No," they replied in unison. I explained what I had seen, and we all went to investigate. As we stood in the room, an eerie silence fell over us, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. My mother began to tidy up, her hands trembling slightly as she noticed small items missing, a lighter, a few trinkets. The hallway of our trailer was unremarkable during the day, but at night it transformed. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, watching, waiting. The feeling of being observed was inescapable, a constant reminder that we were not alone. The narrow hallway leading from the bathroom to the kitchen always felt unnaturally cold, as if the air itself resisted movement. Our dogs, Max and Luna, would often plant themselves at the threshold, their fur bristling as they alternated between low growls and silent staring. their amber eyes tracking invisible movements along the peeling wallpaper. When home alone, I kept the hallway door firmly shut, only venturing through with a dog pressed against my leg, their warmth a fleeting shield. The return trip to the living room became a ritual of quickened steps, and a door slammed behind me, the latch clicking like a held breath released. 18 months after moving into the trailer, my sister Emma returned, her pregnancy necessitating the largest room, shared with our mother, Rose. Their nights were punctuated by shared sightings, an elderly woman in a moth-eaten white dress, her reflection gliding across the vanity mirror as she circled their beds. Emma described her as smiling like she knew a secret we didn't. After 3 months, Emma left for her boyfriend's family home, and I discovered my own pregnancy at 17. My boyfriend, Daniel, moved in, and Rose insisted we take her room. Then came April 2009. My father, James, was found in the living room, his suicide by overdose staining the carpet where we'd once watched movies together. At Aunt Kim's house afterward, a child's laughter would slice through the dark, followed by tiny footsteps pattering down empty halls. "Mommy," the voice would whisper, though Kim had no daughters. Days before my son's birth, James visited me in a dream, his calloused hands cupping my face as he murmured, "I'm free now, Lily. Don't cry." The vision ceased afterward until the move out. Packing James' trailer, we discovered my missing childhood necklace coiled in my closet's corner, its chain knotted like a noose. By 2020, when Daniel and I returned from Tennessee with our younger children, Emma's spare room still smelled of lavender and something older. Something waiting. We finally moved into our own house after staying with Ashley for some time. The old place had its eerie quirks. We were strictly warned never to touch or move the dream catcher hanging on the wall. According to Ashley, disturbing it would anger the spirit attached to it, provoking violent reactions like objects being hurled or unseen hands shoving people. The atmosphere was often thick with unease. The ghost of a young girl would occasionally peek from around the corner upstairs, her presence lingering like a shadow. Sometimes, while sitting at the dining table near the staircase, we'd hear faint footsteps and whispers, as if she were packing just out of sight. One afternoon, while repainting the children's bedrooms with my daughters, Lydia and Lilith, and my niece, Sage, the basement door suddenly slammed shut. The sound echoed through the empty house, sending a chill down my spine. We were the only ones home, and the door had been securely locked. The incident left us staring at each other, wide-eyed, the silence afterward heavy with unspoken fear. For nearly a year, it was just the four of us in that house, until Ashley, her youngest daughter Emma, and Holly, along with her eldest Sage, came to stay. The upstairs housed our bedrooms. Emma shared with Lydia, Sage with Lilith, while Ashley slept in the living room and Holly took the office. Between the 3 bedrooms was a game room, furnished with a TV, an Xbox, and a futon, a cozy retreat that often buzzed with laughter. Late one night, long after the kids had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the playroom, immersed in a Hogwarts Legacy session. The soft glow of the screen cast flickering shadows across the walls. Then a whisper barely audible cut through the quiet. "Mommy." My heart skipped. I paused the game, straining to listen before hurrying to check on the children. But they were all deep in slumber, their breaths steady and undisturbed. Shaking off the unease, I returned to my game. Then movement caught my eye. Between my bedroom and the room shared by Lydia and Emma, a black garbage bag, left carelessly on the floor, began to rise. Slowly, unnaturally, as if lifted by invisible hands. My blood ran cold. A detail worth noting. Back in Tennessee, a friend had gifted me a Ouija board for Christmas. I'd kept it all these years, though Ashley and Holly despised its presence in the house. The children had begged to play with it, but I always refused, heeding their mother's warnings. Now, as I watched that bag float, I couldn't help but wonder if the board's energy had somehow seeped into our lives, inviting something we couldn't control. While we were inside the house, a peculiar incident unfolded that left us unsettled. One afternoon, Emma's older sister, Crystal, visited and pleaded to play with the Ouija board for just a moment. After consulting with Ashley, we agreed and I began recording a video at Crystal's request. As we gathered around the board, the room felt unusually still, the air thick with anticipation. Despite our focus, nothing out of the ordinary occurred during the session. However, the video we captured held an inexplicable anomaly. What should have been a brief 20-second clip inexplicably saved as a 60-hour-long file. Upon reviewing it, the footage after we stopped using the Ouija board was nothing but a black screen accompanied by faint white noise. Following this event, strange occurrences began to plague the house. We started hearing footsteps echoing from the upstairs floor when no one was there, and faint whispers drifted through the halls, sending chills down our spines. Now in 2025, my husband Nate, our daughters Lydia and Lilith, and I have moved into our own home. So far, the house has been peaceful, except for occasional odd behavior from our youngest dog, Javi. Unlike our other dogs, Anakin and Leia, Javi often fixates on specific spots in the house, staring intently at the ceiling or corners, barking and growling as if sensing something unseen. It's unsettling to wonder what he might be perceiving. On a separate occasion, during a camping trip in the desert, I experienced something that still haunts me. A few years ago, some friends and I decided to venture into the wilderness for a night under the stars. The drive was long, the headlights slicing through the barren landscape of sand, scrub, and scattered rocks. There were no signs of civilization, just the vast expanse of desert and the faint scent of dust lingering in the air. Our group consisted of 4, myself, whom I'll refer to as C, and my friends R, M, and LL and M brought whiskey and beer, while R and I carried a bag of psilocybin mushrooms, golden teachers, dry and brittle, consumed without precise measurement. We split the bag, chewing the earthy fragments while the others drank. As the effects began to take hold, we settled around the campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows across our faces. What happened that night remains a blur, a mix of reality and hallucination. Whether it was the mushrooms or something more sinister, I'll leave it for you to decide. By the fire, time seemed to unravel, its edges fraying like old fabric. Oliver's face blurred faintly, his grin flickering as though his skin couldn't quite contain it. Above us, the stars loosened their grip on the heavens, drifting lazily across the vast expanse of the night sky. The desert, once barren and silent, now hummed with an eerie vitality, as if it had awakened from a long slumber. When I stood to excuse myself, a sudden shift in the air stopped me cold. Something stood just beyond the firelight, maybe 20 feet away. At first, I thought it was a coyote. Its silhouette was close enough, but it was too tall, its posture unnaturally elongated. Its head tilted toward me, ears pricked, but its movements were deliberate, almost human. The wind brushed against everything, my clothes, the mesquite bushes, yet its fur remained eerily still. I glanced away, then back. It was still there, unmoving. Was it waiting? Returning to the fire, I asked, "Did you see that?" Michael frowned into his beer, his brow furrowing. "See what?" Before I could respond, Ryan spoke, his voice flat and hollow. "It's here." Liam tried to laugh, muttering something about us being shroomed out, but his laughter was too sharp, too forced. His eyes darted toward the darkness when he thought no one was watching. Then the coyotes began to call. At first, their cries were familiar, but soon the sound twisted, stretching into something unnatural. The high-pitched notes fractured, morphing into a strange, almost melodic cadence that resembled speech. It wasn't a language I recognized, but it carried the shape of words, the kind of sound that prickled the back of your neck because your mind desperately wanted to make sense of it. The fire sputtered, its flames flickering weakly as shadows stretched tall against the jagged rocks. Ryan sat rigid, his body tense. "It's closer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and it was. At the edge of the firelight, the same coyote-like figure stood, but now it had changed. Its body was longer, its shoulders distorted, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The longer I stared, the less it resembled an animal. Then it spoke, not loudly, but with a voice that cut through the silence like a knife. The whisper came again, faint and fragmented, as if my name had been shattered and scattered by the wind. It sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in place. Around the dying fire, none of us dared to move. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sharp crack of the fire that made Michael flinch. When I finally mustered the courage to look back, the shadowy figure was gone, swallowed by the vast, unyielding darkness of the desert. I woke at dawn, my mouth dry and gritty with sand, my body aching as though I'd spent the night dragging myself across the barren landscape. My sleeping bag was half unzipped, and dirt clung stubbornly under my fingernails. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the metallic tang of the desert morning. Michael and Lily were stirring, their faces pale and eyes hollow, still heavy with sleep. But Ryan, he was nowhere to be seen. "Where, Ryan?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Lily shrugged, her gaze distant. "He left before sunrise," she murmured, her voice cracking on the word left. There was something in her tone, a weight that made my stomach twist. I rose unsteadily and walked past the jagged rocks that framed our campsite. There in the soft sand I found tracks. They weren't boot prints or the paw marks of a coyote. These were strange, long and narrow, pressed too deeply into the ground. Some were sharp, almost hoof-like, while others were wide, resembling bare feet. They stretched out in a perfectly straight line, as if carved by an unseen force, until they simply stopped. The last print sank into the sand, and beyond it there was nothing. I tried to convince myself it was the mushrooms we'd taken the night before, a trick of the desert's shifting light, or my mind unraveling under the weight of exhaustion. But sometimes, in the stillness of the night when the air seems to hold its breath, I hear it again, my name, carried on the wind, distorted and wrong. No animal calls, no human voice, but something in between, as if it's trying to mimic the sound, testing it out. Music. Flood from Silver Bullet 54. People say time slips are real. In them you might find yourself traveling to the past, the future, or reliving moments long gone. I've never experienced one myself, but someone I know has. Not only did they slip back in time, but they ended up in one of the most devastating tragedies in American history. To this day, they're convinced they witnessed the aftermath of the 1889 flood in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The sights, the sounds, even the smells. The Great Flood of 1889, as it's often called, claimed over 2,200 lives, including nearly 100 entire families and almost 400 children. It was a catastrophe born from negligence, the collapse of a dam that had shown warning signs for years, ignored until it was too late. When the dam collapsed, the entire town of Johnstown was engulfed in a catastrophic flood, leaving behind a haunting legacy that is still preserved in the city's history center. For my friend Michael, the past seemed to come alive during his recent trip to the Johnstown inclined plane. As he stood there, the crisp autumn air carried a faint chill, and the distant hum of modern life buzzed in the background. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the calm. Michael's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the sky for a plane, helicopter, or jet, but there was nothing. The streets below were eerily empty, devoid of any massive vehicles that could explain the noise. Confusion etched across his face as he tried to make sense of it. Just then, a tour guide nearby began recounting the story of the dam's collapse, mentioning that the exact spot where they stood had once offered a clear view of the disaster. Michael chuckled nervously, brushing it off as a bizarre coincidence. "It's probably just my imagination," he muttered to himself, though a lingering unease settled in his chest. As he wandered through the town, the atmosphere grew increasingly unsettling. He found himself near the stone bridge, where debris had once piled up to a staggering 40 feet during the flood. The air was thick with the acrid stench of raw sewage, rotting trash, and the faint tang of smoke. His nose wrinkled in disgust as his eyes fell upon a grotesque mound of mud, tangled trees, jagged rocks, and an unidentifiable green and brown fluid oozing from its base. The scene was surreal, as if the flood had just happened yesterday. Further along, he passed what he knew to be a hardware company, but instead, he saw a weathered schoolhouse that matched the old photographs his ancestors had left behind. The scent of mold and decay clung to the air, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the faint, mournful cry of a woman. He spun around, expecting to see another tour group, but the street was deserted. A shiver ran down his spine as he became dimly aware that the environment had shifted. The people around him now wore bonnets, breeches, slacks, and coveralls, clothing straight out of the 19th century. Michael rubbed his eyes, hoping the scene would reset to the present, but it remained unchanged. His heart pounded as he realized he had somehow stepped from 2013 into 1889. Fear gripped him, and he instinctively tried to blend in, avoiding eye contact and keeping his modern attire as inconspicuous as possible. He couldn't shake the thought that his appearance might be seen as strange or even sinister. As he continued to walk, the devastation of the flood unfolded before his eyes. Makeshift morgues, dazed children, shell-shocked women, and sobbing men painted a harrowing picture of the town's darkest hour. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of history itself was pressing down on him. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was alive, and Michael was trapped in its grasp. Ethan was growing increasingly frustrated and anxious, trapped in what seemed to be an inexplicable time loop. His mind raced with questions, desperate for a way to return to the present. The eerie silence of the surroundings only amplified his unease. As he retraced his steps, hopping to find a way out, the creak of an old wooden door broke the stillness. Emerging from the schoolhouse was an undertaker, his dark attire smeared with mud and what appeared to be dried blood. The man's piercing gaze locked onto Ethan, and in a gravelly voice he uttered a single word: E. Fear gripped Ethan's chest, his heart pounding as he struggled to respond. Lavatory, perhaps, he stammered, his voice trembling. The undertaker gave a solemn nod and gestured for Ethan to follow him inside. The dimly lit interior smelled of damp wood and decay, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. After using the restroom, Ethan leaned against the sink, pressing his forehead against the cool, smooth surface of the mirror. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing and make sense of the surreal situation. How had he ended up in the past? And more importantly, how could he escape? Stepping back outside, Ethan was met with a stark contrast to the chaos he had witnessed moments earlier. The floodwaters were gone, the morning crowds had vanished, and the debris and fires had disappeared as if they had never existed. Confusion washed over him as he shook his head, trying to piece together what had just happened. To this day, the experience remains a mystery. Was it a vivid dream, or had he somehow stumbled into a time warp? The only certainty was that he had witnessed a haunting replay of one of history's greatest disasters. Music, creepy tree from Yarn Fanatic. Throughout my young adult life, I've encountered numerous unexplained phenomena, but this incident stands out as my first paranormal experience. It occurred during my freshman year of college when I was around 19 years old. I lived in a quaint town nestled in the southern Midwest of the United States. For privacy and safety, I've changed the names and omitted the exact location. One evening, I received a phone call from my friend, whom I'll refer to as Taylor. Her voice was tinged with excitement and a hint of apprehension as she explained that she and our mutual friend, whom I'll call Nikki, had stumbled upon something unusual. She didn't elaborate over the phone, but insisted on picking me up to show me in person. Curiosity piqued, I agreed. They arrived at my house shortly after, and we drove beyond the town limits, venturing into the rural expanse of farms and dense woods. The night air was crisp, and the faint rustling of leaves added an air of mystery to our journey. We left the highway just outside of town, veering onto narrow dirt roads that wound through the countryside. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the faint hum of crickets filled the silence. Though I still don't know exactly where they'd taken me, I remember the drive lasting at least 20 minutes. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the fields. Taylor, sitting in the driver's seat, glanced at me and explained that she and Nikki had visited an old bridge earlier that day. They'd parked there to take pictures, drawn by the rustic charm of the weathered structure. As they stepped out of the car, Taylor's gaze had wandered to a vast field stretching endlessly before them. In the center stood a lone tree, towering and solitary, its silhouette stark against the fading light. She pointed it out to Nikki, who found it oddly captivating. The two moved closer, squinting as they noticed a faint glow emanating from the tree's direction. To their astonishment, it appeared to be on fire. The trunk, hollowed out by rot, revealed glowing embers within its gaping cavity. Illuminated by the eerie light was something swaying gently in the breeze. Taylor edged closer to the bridge's railing, her heart pounding as she realized it was a rope, a noose, to be precise. As we approached the area Taylor had described, a deep unease settled over me. The air felt heavier, charged with an inexplicable tension. My stomach churned, and I couldn't shake the sensation that unseen eyes were tracking our every move. I kept my gaze fixed on the window, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The feeling persisted for what felt like an eternity, though it was only 3 minutes before we reached the bridge. Sitting in the passenger seat, I turned to Taylor, my voice low and urgent. "Don't stop the car," I said. She shot me a puzzled look but nodded, her hands tightening on the wheel. As we crossed the bridge, Nikki's voice broke the silence. "The tree's gone," she whispered, her tone tinged with disbelief. I glanced out the window, and sure enough, the field was empty. The tree, the glowing embers, the noose, all of it had vanished without a trace. My unease deepened as we continued down the road, the weight of the experience pressing on my chest. We eventually returned to the highway, but the eerie feeling lingered, clinging to me like a shadow. The car was quiet for several minutes before Taylor spoke up, her voice hesitant. "There was something else," she admitted. "Around the bridge there was a woman. She was following us." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there. The memory of that day remains etched in my mind, a haunting reminder of the inexplicable. Walking down the quiet, dimly lit road, Emma recounted the chilling encounter she had experienced just a few nights prior. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained why she hadn't stopped the car that evening, and why she had heeded my warning. She described the woman in vivid detail, long, flowing black hair and a white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Emma wasn't one to fabricate stories. She had always been a kind, honest soul, and I trusted her implicitly. I believed her when she said it was a woman in white who had chosen to reveal herself that night. Thankfully, no one I knew had seen her since. That incident was one of the reasons I vowed never to shower late at night again, and why I eventually quit my job as a waitress at Magpie 24. To provide some context, this all happened in the house where both of my paternal grandparents had passed away. I was just 18 at the time, still living at home. That particular day, I had worked an exhausting 11.5-hour shift, running around taking orders and dealing with customers. By the time I got home, I was utterly drained. I decided to take a shower to wash off the remnants of spilled food that had clung to me throughout the day. Our shower was located in the back room of the house, the very room where my grandparents had died. It always carried an unsettling aura, as if unseen eyes were watching from the shadows. I stepped into the shower and cranked the temperature to scalding, hoping the heat would soothe my weary muscles. As I reached for the shampoo, I noticed the lights beginning to dim. At first, I dismissed it, thinking the bulbs were simply burning out. I lathered the shampoo into my hair, the scent of lavender filling the steamy air. Closing my eyes, I tilted my head back to rinse the suds away. When I opened them again, my heart nearly stopped. A full figure stood before me, its hand reaching out to pull back the shower curtain. I screamed, my voice echoing off the tiled walls, and yanked the curtain aside. But there was no one there. Terrified, I bolted from the bathroom, my wet feet slipping on the wooden floor as I raced to my room. I didn't sleep a wink that night, my mind replaying the horrifying image over and over. The next day, I dragged myself to work for an afternoon shift, covering for one of the other waitresses. But the memory of that night lingered, haunting me long after the sun had risen. The day was unusually slow, and the cafe closed early that evening. As the last customer left, the soft hum of the vacuum filled the quiet space. I was focused on my task, meticulously cleaning the floors and wiping down the tables, while my work mom, Emma, counted the cash register in the corner. The dim overhead lights cast long shadows across the room, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Emma's pink shirt disappear into the kitchen. The door swung open and shut with a soft creak. I paused, the vacuum still humming in my hand, and glanced toward the kitchen. Something felt off. Setting the vacuum aside, I followed her, calling out softly, "Emma, is everything okay? Did someone come in?" Stepping into the kitchen, I found it empty. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of grease and cleaning supplies hung in the air. Confused, I pushed open the back door and stepped outside. The cool evening breeze brushed against my skin, and the sound of distant traffic filled the night. There, under the dim glow of the streetlight, stood Emma, a cigarette between her fingers, laughing with Michael, one of the kitchen staff, as he tossed out old grease. "Emma," I called, my voice tinged with confusion. "How did you get out here so fast? I just saw you in the kitchen." She turned to me, her brow furrowed, and gave me a puzzled look. "What are you talking about? I've been out here for 20 minutes. I haven't been inside since we closed." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Just last week, I'd seen a shadow move in the storage room when no one was there. I felt a chill run down my spine. Before I could say anything, Felicity, one of the other staff members, stepped forward. Her eyes met mine, and she said quietly, "You saw it too, huh?" I turned to her, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" She glanced around nervously before explaining. "Our boss has this thing for haunted antiques. He keeps them in the storage facility next door. They like to mess with the new hires. Once they get used to you, they'll leave you alone." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I'd encountered spirits before, but this felt different, more personal, more deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it had chosen me. That night, I left the cafe and never looked back. Even now, I wonder if it followed me home, if it's still out there, watching. I can only hope that whoever works there now hasn't experienced what I did. Christian, I never believed in cryptids until this incident. Now 15, this happened when I was around 7 or 8. It started as an ordinary day, school, home, dinner, and then bed. But that night something shifted. The air in my bedroom grew unnaturally cold and dense, clinging to my skin like a damp shroud. Being young and naive, I dismissed it as typical for an Australian winter in New South Wales. I drifted off to sleep, unaware of what awaited me. A few hours later, I jolted awake, an unshakable sensation of being watched crawling over me. Before I could process it, a piercing scream shattered the silence, a sound so agonizing it mimicked my mother's voice. My heart raced as I bolted to her room, only to find her peacefully asleep. Confused but relieved, I sighed and returned to bed, chalking it up to exhaustion and a trick of the night. But when I stepped back into my room, the sight froze me in place. My dog lay lifeless on my bed, his eyes grotesquely gouged out. A scream tore from my throat as I frantically scanned the room. Yet when I looked back, he was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic surged through me. I flicked on every light, their harsh glow offering little comfort. For weeks, I slept with the lights blazing, the memory of that night haunting me. Though the vision ceased, the oppressive cold lingered, a constant reminder of the inexplicable. Months passed and I began to forget. The lights stayed off and life resumed its rhythm, school, home, dinner, bed. But that night everything changed. As I entered my room, an icy chill gripped the air, far colder than any winter night. I climbed into bed, pulling the blankets tight, and tried to sleep. Hours later, I awoke to faint whispers emanating from beneath my bed. My breath hitched as I cautiously peered over the edge, but there was nothing. Relieved, I settled back, unaware that the worst was yet to come. I jolted awake in my bed, the cold sweat clinging to my skin as my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. Before me stood a towering silhouette, its form draped in tattered black fabric that seemed to absorb the faint light. In its skeletal grip was an object that made my blood run cold, a staff meticulously crafted from what appeared to be human finger bones, each joint and knuckle fused together in a grotesque mosaic. A scream tore from my throat, but only a strangled whimper escaped. The figure recoiled slightly, allowing a sliver of moonlight to illuminate its face. My stomach twisted at the sight, decaying flesh slewed from its skull in ragged strips, revealing patches of yellowed bone beneath. Where eyes should have been, there were only bottomless voids, darker than the night itself. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the entity dissolved into the shadows, leaving me trembling beneath the suffocating weight of my blankets. It took hours for my racing heart to settle, but eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. That night marked the last full-bodied apparition, though faint whispers still slithered from beneath my bed, murmuring secrets I dared not decipher. Years later, we finally moved. Our new home was a sanctuary, warm, quiet, and blessedly free of the unseen horrors that had plagued our old house. I often wonder if some malevolent spirit had staked its claim on that place, resenting our intrusion. Whatever it was, I'm grateful to have escaped its grasp. Demons, haunted woods, my eccentric cousins' occult dabblings, quite the anthology we've amassed tonight. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What chilling tales would you like featured in this year's Halloween special? My well of ideas has run dry. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. For more eerie stories, tune into Tales from the Break Room for workplace horrors, Alone in the Woods for wilderness nightmares, or Night Watchers, where my friends and I dissect all things horror, uncensored and strictly for mature audiences. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and above all, stay creepy. This world is far stranger than we dare to imagine.